Now, again, under the Public Finance Manual, you are obliged to speak up if you think something is not value for money, which you did. But why do you not think you've blurred the lines a little bit between your role as an impartial civil servant and the justification which appears in your letter to Neil Gray, which we've got sight of, around government policy objectives and ministerial decisions? I mean, you stray into that territory. Why did you feel it was necessary to do that?
I'm very clear about my obligations under the PFA Act. I'm required to take a view on value for money, and if I judge that I can't be assured of value for money in the case of any particular funding proposal, then I need to seek written authority. Equally, and I'm accountable to this Parliament for, in respect of my role as an accountable officer. That's a direct accountability to this Parliament. Equally, the PFA Act recognises that ministers may have wider considerations that they wish to take into account. As a senior official, we provide advice to ministers to help them to implement their policies. Ministers' objectives with regards to FMPG have been clearly stated. They're long-standing objectives. They haven't significantly altered over the course of time. So the civil service also has an obligation to Scottish Government ministers to provide them with advice that allows them to implement their policies.
But I guess my question is, and again, forgive me, because these are steps taken by a minister that we haven't seen for a very long time. But rather than simply saying you do not think this represents value for money, full stop, you then go on to elaborate about there being entirely legitimate and important factors that ministers can take into account. I mean, do you not think that's straying into territory which is about governmental policy? Isn't your job simply to say whether or not this meets the tests of propriety, regularity and value for money?
So it's certainly essential that I do what you've just described, and the letter seeking written authority, I think, is clear on that point about regularity, propriety and value for money. And as I've said, as an accountable officer, I'm accountable to this Parliament for the exercise of my obligations under the PFA Act. At the same time, we're accountable to our ministers and we provide them with advice that allows them to implement their policies. So the letter recognises that, as the PFA Act does itself, that there may be wider considerations that ministers wish to take into account in deciding to proceed with a particular funding proposal, and that is what has been done in this case.
But it is a very much on the one hand and on the other piece of advice you're given, which I find an interesting approach. Can I move on to something